Good morning, everyone. So good morning from Bangkok, and welcome to the FAO AIT third expert group meeting on ground truth data. Hope you have seen we're going to run 3 days, like nearly 2-hour sessions, and today is the first sessions we'll be running, and then we'll finishing on 15th September. And until other people also get connected, I will tell you a few usual guidelines. How we going to kind of housekeeping rules, how we're going to run the online meeting. And I encourage everyone to keep your mic muted. And I will be giving enough time for Q&A after individual presentations. So if you have any questions, you can put into the chat box, and then I will take those questions to the presenters. And during the Q&A session, if you want to talk, so you can raise your hand, and then I will give you the floor for the discussion. Let me go back to the agenda today. And after the welcome remarks, so we're going into 4 technical presentations. So we added 1 more technical presentation. So I'll be keeping the time. And we will give around 25 minutes maximum for the presenters. And 3 minutes before 25, I will spotlight my camera, and then I put the yellow flag. And then 1 minute before, then I will put my red flag. And if you're crossing, then I will unmute and then disturb your presentation. So that is for the presenters. So let's start the workshop officially. I think I will invite Sangeeta Dubey, regional statistician from FAO Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, to give the welcome remarks and set the scene for everyone to start this 3 days workshop. Over to Sangeeta.
Thank you, Govinda. Welcome, guests. As most of you know, this is the 3rd of our expert group meetings, co-organized by FAO and the Geoinformatics Center of the Asian Institute of Technology. We held our very first meeting towards the end of 2019 as a side event, as a side event to the last International Conference on Agricultural Statistics. During that expert group meeting, we had focused on one aspect of new technology, primarily on the use of computer-assisted interviewing. And we had various countries present on their innovations in that area, but it wasn't the only topic. We also started to discuss the use of remote sensing. Our second expert group meeting was held after the Statistics Commission for Asia and Pacific, the FAO Statistics Commission for Asia and Pacific, named the Asia Pacific Commission on Agricultural Statistics, which is a member state mandated and organized commission. And we held a 3-day expert group meeting on the uses of remote sensing. One of the things that has come out quite frequently, not only in the FAO convened meetings, but also meetings convened by other organizations, the EO Data Task Force of the Big Data Group, managed by the UN Statistics Division, has been the importance of ground truth data. This has come up over and over again, that ground truth data is absolutely essential to train, test, and validate the AI algorithms that are used to interpret Earth observation data, satellite imagery, etc. It's also come out over and over again how expensive that is. And much of ground truth data does use traditional survey techniques. Yet despite that, I'm not aware of meetings convened to discuss how do we improve this important area of work. Coincidentally, fairly recently, the Office of the Chief Statistician of FAO also announced the importance of developing international standards and guidelines on the use of Earth observation data. So our group has a really unique opportunity in front of us to make sure that as my headquarters colleagues are developing these methodologies, the role of ground truth data and the need for guidelines and standards in the collection, use, and dissemination of ground truth data is also very clear in the work that the Office of the Chief Statistician of FAO leads. I haven't heard a lot of discussion, so that means that we're also in a position where the outcome of this particular expert group meeting could lead to generating that interest. And that's one of the objectives of meeting this week, to actually get a draft position paper together on some of the issues that deal with the gaps in ground truth data, which are largely in standards and collection and dissemination. I think the use of ground truth data is already very well documented. The GIS community in the world has the lead on that. But the ground truth data itself remains forgotten. And I think in its appropriate collection and dissemination, we have two unique opportunities. One, we can look at ways to reduce the costs, and we can transform this data set into a global public good. The second is, I think it's one of those unique areas that actually provides a real opportunity for public-private partnerships. Often when we talk about public-private partnerships, we're not talking about partnerships. We're talking about contractual arrangements. We're talking about how government or authorities or international organizations can engage the private sector in some kind of paid capacity. But we know that ground truth data is also used by private firms. We've seen in our last expert group meeting presentations on how even companies like Airbus collect and use ground truth data. We're aware that finance companies, whether they be banks or insurance companies, use ground truth data, and they use it to validate, again, the algorithms that they develop for the use of remote sensing. So if we're collecting ground truth data for agricultural statistics, and we've got an insurance company collecting ground truth data for their purposes, for monitoring crop failure or crop damage, why aren't we sharing this data? And there is a benefit to both private and public organizations to do this. So I think that second goal, although it's lofty, is probably one way that we can really start leveraging our collective will to share an asset that has mutual benefit. But in terms of setting international standards and guidelines, that can only be done relatively rapidly over the next few years by governments. And where FAO has an advantage is its convening power to ensure that the authorities that are producing agriculture statistics, the government authorities producing agriculture statistics, can actually bring their expertise to bear in developing these standards and guidelines. And we've done this in other areas of agriculture statistics. It's now time that we start looking at this really important source of big data. So what we'll have over the course of the next three days is presentations by all of us sharing our expertise. We have developed with AIT a short survey, about 10 minutes, to start getting at what the contents of ground truth data should be when it's being used for agriculture statistics. What are the core variables? Because this starts feeding into standards and guidelines. And using the results of that survey and what you share, we hope to draft a position paper that all the members and participants in this expert group are comfortable saying that they contributed to, even just as an acknowledgement. So this is more of a starting point than it is an ending point. And I hope you'll find that the presentations over the next day are useful in generating that insight. We'll share with you at the end of today that survey. It's in Google Forms, so it's a digital online survey. It should only take you 10 minutes. And we hope that because it is designed to be short, that those of you who would like to share more of your thoughts and insights, we can follow up in a one-on-one interview. A second objective is to compile the papers that have been presented into a regional publication so that we can start sharing, not just within our group. PowerPoint presentations are wonderful to communicate and exchange knowledge within a group, but they don't engage newcomers as well. So to archive the information we exchange, we really appreciate all the papers you've submitted. They'll be compiled into a regional publication, properly edited. They'll be shared with all of you before any final publication is made. So that's a second objective. A third is a personal wish that among some of the better papers, and particularly those from our younger colleagues, our colleagues that may not have as much access to funds to get them to international conferences, we can start identifying conferences that we could sponsor you to attend and present your work. So this is a third goal of this EGM. How that shapes up will largely, I think, be a result of how we actually come up with our draft position paper and our final publication. So with that, again, I would like to thank all of you, not just on behalf of FAO, but I think on behalf of Agriculture Statistics. I think the work we're doing is very important, and we're pushing something that could be very simple forward, I think, at just the right time. So again, thank you all very much for joining us, for your participation. And I hope you feel free to raise your questions, have really good discussions, so you can feel that you're also a legitimate author of any kind of draft paper we come out with as an EGM. Thank you, and back to you, Govinda.
Thank you, Sangeeta. So I think explaining the objectives, and then we are trying to move forward in these 3 days. I think thanks again for sharing importance of ground truth data and raising these discussions. So I think without further ado, so I will give the floor to Dr. Mansoor Kumar Hasarika, so Director of Geoinformatics Center of Asian Institute of Technology. So we jointly collaboratively working with on this aspect with this FAO, Sangeeta's group. So over to Dr. Mansoor for the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Govinda. Good morning to everybody. It's my pleasure to have you all in this very important expert group meeting. And I'd like to thank FAO and my colleagues to arrange this meeting. So as Sangeeta briefed the importance of ground truth data, also it is becoming more increasingly important because we have now many more satellites, many more type of sensors, and also the resolution of this data are increasing, increasingly available. And on top of that, many of this data is also you are getting free nowadays. So that's a kind of game changer in the sense earlier we had to even say Landsat TM, which we need to buy. One scene was around $600. Those data are absolutely free, which is 30-meter resolution. And whereas now you get Sentinel-2 data, 10-meter resolution, that is also completely free. So there's a big opportunity for using remote sensing in this space. And I think crop monitoring or agriculture could be one of the best application of remote sensing data because it's cover a large area. And you can get satellite data easily for these agricultural lands. And having said that, the ground truth data, as I said, as you have better resolution, higher resolution satellite data, your ground truth become much more important. Particularly if you have a location and a field, there are more than one crops, then from satellite data without ground truth you cannot do anything. You need to have ground truth data, get the signature of that particular crop, and then you use that one for your classification or yield prediction or estimation of that particular area of that crop. So I think in that sense, this particular initiative is very, very relevant and very, very important, I would say. And again, having this ground truth data, also data sharing or availability of this ground truth data for others is also very, very important. Normally, these ground truth data are collected by many of the government agencies and others, and they remain with themselves. But I think this initiative from FAO, particularly Sangeeta, I think this is very praiseworthy attempt, and I believe that what a time with all these our people who are in this meeting and beyond. maybe this data will be made available. And so that we can, I mean, we have the pre-satellite data, but if you don't have this kind of very important supporting data for the analysis of this remote sensing, is not available easily. So I think this, I really appreciate this effort, and I wish a very successful workshop in next 3 days, including today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mansoor. I think let me, before go to the technical presentation, I will quickly share the agenda today, and then it will be easy for everyone to understand what is our plan. So I think we are moving into 4 sessions. So starting from the technologies for collecting ground truth data for generating of agriculture statistics, and then ground truth data collection approaches for crop mapping, and especially lesson learned during our fieldwork execution recently in Thailand, and crop monitoring and yield forecasting using satellite data. And then lastly, I think maintaining privacy and publishing anonymized geospatial data. So this is the outline for today's session. And I'm requesting all presenters like try to finish the presentation by 20 minutes. And then I will be flagging yellow flag at 17 minutes and then red flag at 19 minutes. So if you're crossing 20 minutes, so then I will try to interrupt. So then we can keep, after each and every presentation, we can keep time for discussion as well. Thank you. So I think I will try to move to the first presenter. I think Dr. Dan, if I introduce him briefly, so he's the team leader at Geoinformatics Center of AIT, and he's working in the geospatial domain for more than 10 years for handling remote sensing data. So he's trying to discuss about the technologies for collecting ground truth data for generating agriculture statistics. Floor is yours, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Kavinda. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So today is my pleasure to be here to present our work relating to the technology to collect the ground truth data for generation of agriculture statistics. And as introduced by Kavinda, so I'm come from Geoinformatics Center, Asian Institute of Technology. So my presentation is just covered by several general sessions, including introduction, objective, methodology, and some discussion on the results that we got doing our work. So for the introduction part, as you know that according to United Nations 2020, so observation data, we can call it like remote sensing data, plays a significant role in producing and having official statistics to complement traditional social, economic, and environmental data source. And you know that the advance of the satellite remote sensing data makes it an attractive opinion for extracting crop information. It will be very helpful for agriculture management. And another one is, you know that when people or scientists or researchers, they work with the observation data, normally the agriculture remain one of the most research observation data application. For example, like the researcher, they use observation data to map the crop areas or the estimated yields or even the crop loss by using several technology. And another one is, you know, that when we talk about the observation data, we have to think about its spatial resolution. Spatial resolution means because the satellite data normally have a very core resolution, and nowadays with the development of the technology, UAVs is the best choice for this kind of work, because we can fly to collect and provide better information. It would be really benefits the agriculture sector. And however, so everything have its limitation, and observation data is also, because you know that if the observation data alone are insufficient, either because the data don't have the required spatial or temporal resolution, or because the data are insufficiently accurate for the given location. So come up with this problem. So the question here is, if we wanted to use the observation data, how we are going to fill the upper gap that mentioned in previous slide. Okay, so the question is, so no need to worry. So everyone here gather together, and we will try to discuss about that question to find answer. Okay, let's check it out in the next slide. Okay, the answer for the question is the route choose data, because you know that the route choose data can fill a key gap by providing a key variable to overcome this issue that we have mentioned above. And another one is route choose data are very essential for validating and interpreting the results of the remote sense analysis. Because everyone we work with the remote sensing data, so we know how important of the route choose data is. And the most important when we work with the route choose data is the quality of the data. So because you know that if the route choose data is not representative and accurate, so that means our results will not be accurate for sure. So, and another limitation of the route choose data is, you know that today to acquiring timely and accurate field data have been challenging, because due to lack of technology, or maybe economic resource, human resource, and other things. So that's why we are here together to discuss about the way how we can finalize the standard procedure to collect the route choose data. And follow the introduction. So the main objective of my presentation is divided into 3 particular objectives. So the first one is to develop and test technology of the route choose data collection to reduce cost of the collecting data. And the second objective is to facilitate the scaling of the route choose data creation and exchange through the data sharing platform. And the last one is to improve access to regularly updated route choose repositories to enable scalable, even observation based analytics in emerging agriculture economies. Okay, so next one, I would like to talk about the general framework of our research. So the first one we have, as you see on the figure here, we have 3 main steps. The first one is the desk work. The second one is sample design. And the last one is the data collection post selection. And of course, after we have the location, we have to conduct the field work. So based on our desk work, we read many papers related to agriculture studies and how people generate the route choose data by using remote sensing and observation data. And another one is we also try with the remote sensing data, drone data, and GIS data, mobile app, and even we also interview the expert as well to get the idea from them. So based on the desk review, we have several output here, including the group of interest, study error selection, and data acquisition. And after we have the target from the first step, we move to the second step. We convert all the information into the geospatial domain to do the data sampling to identify where should be the best optimized location for us to conduct a field survey. And to do that, we come up with the output, including the agriculture map, and another one is the location that we can select it. And after that, we just use the data collection point to conduct the field work. So I will go into more detail in this next slide. Okay, so first about the group of interest showing here. So in our research, we are mainly focused in 3 main groups. The first one is rice, of course, because we are living in the Southeast Asia. Rice is very important for our daily life. And next one is the sugarcane and maize. So that means we focus in 3 main groups here. And the next one is this is the way how we select the location to conduct the survey, because you know that we gathered too much information on the internet. Even we also discussed with the office department related to the this kind of work. And finally, we got the information about the distribution of the our interest group at the province and district level. And based on this information, we will select the district with the largest agriculture area for 3 selected groups. to conduct a survey. And the results of our literature review. So we have listed out around 10 provinces that have more total drop areas according to 3 selected groups. And based on the selection results, so we select 2 locations in Thailand. The first one in Nakhon Sawan province and the second one in Lopburi province. And so after we selected, we already conducted a field survey in May and in July by using different approach. And what kind of approach, what kind of technology we already use. So I will introduce in the following slide. Here, I just want to show you about the study area, just one study area in Nakhon Sawan province here, and here is the province, and our study area in the right side. Okay, so after we selected the location, so we will do the data sampling. So to do the data sampling, we will use the stratified random sampling approach to identify the location. And to do this, so we have to follow 2 main steps. The first one is we use the observation data to produce the binary map of the agricultural area and non-agricultural area. So based on the results, we will identify different kinds of drop type by using the temporal NDVI profile plot. And the next one, we will select the data collection for using random sampling methods. Okay, so for the first step, so based on our work, we use the Landsat 8 data to produce a growth map, because you know that when we select the Sentinel-2 data, we cannot use due to 2 reasons. The first one is the cloud cover. The second one is the data is not continuously to generate the NDVI profile. Okay, so based on our work, we already select around 10 images from 2021 to 2022 in very good condition. Good condition has been it's very clear and having had less cloud cover on the data. And so based on the image we collected, we calculate the NDVI. NDVI stands for normalized different vegetation index for each image. After we have the NDVI, we create the time series NDVI and we classify that time series NDVI to produce the agricultural and non-agricultural maps. And the final step, we're using the temporal NDVI profiles to identify different type of agriculture or crop. So based on our analysis results, we are able to identify different type of agriculture here, including agriculture 1 to 4, build up area, water 1 to means because due to its spectral reflection, so that means the color will be different. That means we will classify to different type of water. And for sure here, at least we knew a few type of agriculture here, but to make sure what is it, we have to go to the field to conduct the route truth data to verify our interpretation results. And the next step is the data collection point selection here. So to do this step, we follow by 3 main steps. The first step is we create a 1 by 1 square kilometer grid. So as you can see on the figure on the left side, so we create for the Horn district with 1 by 1 square kilometer. And so based on that grid, we will calculate the agricultural area within a grid. So if the logic is if the grid is greater than 0.5 square kilometer, we consider as a route truth data collection point. Otherwise, we will remove it and add the results here. So we can see, sorry, in the right side, we can see on the disappear here. I mean, the agriculture here, that means we only remove it. So you can see this is due to our calculation. And the step 3 is we random selected around 10% of the total grid to conduct the survey. And to conduct the survey, we only did several technology to collect the data in our selected area. So first one is very traditional one, is manual data collection. So you can see on the figure here. So this is our data input from when we went to the field to collect the data, including the day, time, location, the GPS coordination and the group tab and the draw photo, I mean group photo. And if there are anything on the field, maybe we can take a note here. And next one is, you can see this is the procedure that we did it. So the first one is we will fill on the information on the input data here. And after that, we will record the coordination of the point. Next one is we will identify the direction, the north direction. And after that, we will take a drop photo in different direction, including north, east, south, and west. And the second approach that we did is we used the mobile app to collect the route truth data from the field, because we know that now the smartphone is very popular around the world, including the low income countries. So based on that the kind of device, we can very easily to collect the basic information such as location, administrative boundary, data of the day of data collection, group signature, and so on. It depends on what we need to collect on the field. And according to our desk work, we found that around 20 mobile applications are used to collect the route truth data. And based on our internal discussion, we selected the QField mobile application to conduct the survey in our study area. The reason we selected the QField is because this is an open source mobile data. It's very important one, it's free of charge. The second one is this allows an extension of an existing QGIS project to be loaded into the mobile device, because it supported the additional work. It's very convenient for us if we use this kind of device and mobile app. And another one is we can use the uplive version of the app as well. And another one is you can see, so this is when we went to the field, we used the QField mobile application to correct the location and other additional information like the location, like the GPS coordination, the group photos, and other important information when for our analysis. Okay, and next one is in our case, we also use drone to collect the route truth data, because you know that I believe everyone know drone can rapidly collect a large amount of the route truth data at a low cost than the field survey. However, the limitation of the drone is it can collect rapid a large amount of data, but within a small study area. I mean, in this case, less than around 100 hectares. And you know that somehow the drone data cannot replace the satellite data due to its spatial temporal resolution and its coverage area. So, but in this case, we would recommend drone data can be suitable for assisting in the collection of the route truth observation. And based on our resource, so we also use drone to collect the data at some location that we inaccessible on foot, for example, like due to environment, including dense vegetation block access, or maybe the road we cannot access by our car or vans. And the next potential technology that we can use to generate the route truth data is the satellite imageries, because you know that how to say the spatial resolution is very important when we work with the observation data, particular remote sensing data. However, very high resolution satellite data are needed. But the limitation of the high resolution satellite data is the data is not free of charge. That means it's quite expensive if we use it to produce the route truth data. And one advantage of the satellite data is the spatial resolution is also finer than the GPS coordination. This is the advantage of the satellite data. However, according to Peter and his team in 2020, they suggest that the data should have a spatial resolution similar to the scale of the group being studied. For example, in his research, he recommends that if we work with the Saturday data to produce the group, to produce the mice group, he would recommend we use the Saturday data with the resolution is around 14 to 27 centimeter. And so to overcome this limitation of the Saturday data, we would recommend smartphone and drone can be robot as a useful technology to collect and produce the raw truth data. And this is an additional things that we try to discuss here today about the open source raw truth data, because you know that to collect the data in the selected area, maybe sometimes it's not feasible, or it's because of prohibitively expensive, or because of security issues. So that's why the open source raw truth data is also a potential source for us to generate the raw truth according to what we need to generate the agriculture statistics. Here I list out a few sources of the open source raw truth data, including the global food security analysis support data at 30 meter source here, or global land cover mapping estimation, and so on. So if you are interested in, maybe you can access the mentioned website here for more information. And the last part is very important for us, is how we are going to verify or maybe validate the raw truth data that we collected on the field. So you know that raw truth data already is in situ observation data. So that means is already the raw truth data product. So there's impossible to validate. And but to avoid any error or problem with the raw truth data, so before we went to the field, we were very carefully to prepare the work plan, technical guidelines, the checklist, to ensure that nothing was forgotten during our field work. And after the survey, we also did the post-processing step. This means we also check the collected raw truth data against. How we are going to check? We use the very high satellite data, for example, like ArcMap, Basemap, or Google Earth engines, and the photo taken on the field to minimize errors. So this step will contribute to the overall quality of the raw truth data set. Okay, so I would like to end my presentation by summarize and recommendation. Because you know that when it thanks to the useful technique for us to produce very quickly raw truth data by using mobile app, drone, even satellite data. But however, there remain several question challenges that we need to find the answer for it. The question here is how much data is enough? Actually, this is a very difficult question. And finding the minimum amount of the data that will provide optimal model accuracy will enable better decision about how much time and resource to spend on the field campaign. So I think that's all for my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. So wrapping up the presentation in 20 minutes. So I would like to open for discussions. Yeah, I see questions from Jacinta. I think you can get the floor and then ask a question directly, Jacinta. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's a great presentation. I was really interested in the QField app that you talked about. Do you think there's any possibility to use ground truth collected via an app like that for citizen science? I know there are some groups that look at the use of citizen science data for some SDGs, but I don't know if that would work in this case or how feasible that is. What do you think?
Jacinta, thank you very much for your question. Actually, your question is very good question. So when I prepare the presentation, I was thinking about the citizen science approach as well, because we already did it in another project to use citizen science or maybe the university student to support us to collect the data from the field. However, because this kind of work is kind of heavy for the citizens, we need to remove this. How to say? We need to have a very good plan to promote this kind of activity. And however, because we mainly work in the agriculture studies field of research, so it's also have a limitation there, because citizens, they don't have much idea what is agriculture studies. Including me, but for example, like when before I work with Sangeeta for this project, I totally sometimes I also argue with Sangeeta that in about the terminology of this in terms of GS and remote sensing, and in terms of agriculture studies is slightly or completely different definition. So I believe if we want to promote the route truth data through the citizen, so we have to make a plan. I think that's a good thing that we can list down, and we will how to say, we will promote it in the future for collecting the route truth data, and as we AI topic is collecting the data and disseminating the data and exchange the data as well. It will be great for everyone in our community. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right, the plan's important because people's classifications are subjective, and like you say, they don't have the knowledge of the crops and how to measure that. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jacinta, for the questions.
Sorry, Kavinda, can I say one more thing? At least I would like to take this chance to thank to the Office of Agriculture and Economy Thailand, because with their information and their guidance, it helped us a lot in conducting the route truth data collection in Thai. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for the acknowledgement. And also, Jacinta, I think other colleagues also use some other platform, like if you have the open forest, so we also start to use it. Yeah, I think further ado, I think there are hands up from China side. So if you want to raise any questions, or to China, China big room. Yeah.
I have a question. First, thanks Dr. Dan gave a very good presentation how to use remote sensing and ground truth data to do some province level and district level the statistics of area. I have a question. As your presentation, you do some grade about 1 kilometer plus 1 kilometer. Why do you select the area include the crop then larger than 0.5 kilometer square kilometer to do some ground truth data investigation? This is the first question. The second question, as you mentioned, you selected 10 TM image from 2020 year to 2021 year. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So first of all, let me answer your first question, why we selected the area that greater than 0.5 square kilometer to consider as a route truth data point. And because when we create a read here and calculate the area within a read, so some of the crop type have a very small area, is for sure is less than 0.5. And normally when before I did this sampling approach, I also this is for another project, but I selected the area within a read greater than 0.7 square kilometer, because its distribution is quite larger than the crop here. So that's why when I calculate it, I was thinking that if we reduce to 0.5 square kilometer, most of the crop can be remaining on the reed. So based on that, we can easily to select any random reed according to the results. And for the second question here, and at least because
your image is from the year 2020 to year 2021. Why there are 2 years image did you select it?
Okay, so I think here is for the second question, because the first objective is we want to select the image in 2022. However, at the time we went through the field to conduct a survey, it's in May of 2022. So that means it have no data from May to December 2022. And if without the data, we cannot produce the time series NDVI plot. If without that, we cannot identify different type of crop. That's why we select a few images in the previous year from 2021 to 2022. Another reason is because for the crop type in the selected area is not much change over a few years. So that means from 2021 to 2022, I mean, it's also possible for us to use to identify the crop on the field. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for the question, so I will move quickly to the Ms.
Sorry, I
Sophianti.
have another question. I want to know how much accuracy of your classification, the overall accuracy and the commit accuracy and omit accuracy.
I remember last time when we generate this map, we use the information from the OAE, because before we went to the field, we also communicate with OAE to ask them for some reference map including different type of crop. So based on that, we create a random point to check the accuracy, and based on our classification results, we check the overall accuracy is just around more than 70%. And for user accuracy and producer accuracy, at least I forgot, because we produced this map in May. So, but the overall accuracy is around 70%, and we believe that it is also acceptable for us to use to collect the raw truth data. And another thing is the accuracy of the map is also not much important, because we have no idea about the field. So that's why we use the satellite data to identify different cluster of different crop, and based on that we use the NDVI profile and field visit to confirm what kind of crop, and based on that we will use that raw truth data with the Sentinel-2 to produce a more accurate crop for our project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'll quickly take two more questions before moving to the next presentation. Ms. Sophianti, over to you. Yep.
Actually, my question is same with the delegate from China. Is about the accuracy, because in your presentation you said that your accuracy cannot be validated, right?
Yep.
It's not possible to validate it. Because if you want to convince statistician, so you have to provide the accuracy. And they ask us, yes, they ask us the accuracy, if you want to compare or use remote sensing data. So they ask the accuracy is have to more than 90%. I think 70% is not acceptable. But I asked also to Miss Sangeeta. So what is the accuracy acceptable, internationally acceptable for if we use remote sensing data for statisticians? I'm sorry, it's very difficult to say that word. So maybe we can we can discuss about it, because for the accuracy for remote sensing use, I think to get more than 90% is very difficult, right?
Yeah.
Yes, right. So, but statistician asked us to do that. So, I mean, we have to agree about that. What is accuracy? I think that's all my my question. Thank you, Kavinda.
Thank you for your question. Let me quickly answer your question. So to do so, maybe let's work together in the future, because you know that when we work with the satellite data, the final resolution is around 10 meters. But you know that when we perform the image recognition, we include in traditional methods like the image page classification or the modern methods like machine learning or deep learning to produce a crop map, I think it's very difficult to get the overall accuracy is more than 90%. This is the first thing. To overcome with this challenge, maybe we can use final resolution like drone data or very high satellite data. So based on that, maybe we don't need to do the classification, we just do the digitizing. So that kind of thing is also possible to produce more accurate map than the classification approach. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
The second question was, statisticians require a certain level of accuracy. What is that level and how is it measured? So I'll be honest with you, this is where there is a gap in international standards and guidelines. And we do have to work to establish what is an acceptable level of accuracy. When Dan talked about use of drone images or higher resolution satellite images, those are just two mechanisms to get ground truth data. I think one of the reasons why traditional surveys would still apply is effectively what you're doing is you're subsampling the areas in which you're actually estimating your crop statistics. So if you're identifying crops, you might take a subsample or a sample of locations using area sampling methods. And then there are three, usually data sets, those kinds of data sets are divided into three. One is to train your algorithms, one is to test your algorithms, and one is to validate or to run your algorithms. It is going to be in one of the later stages that you can actually measure accuracy, because now you have something that has been collected in situ to determine the crop. So you can test how good is your algorithm. That's how you would start generating statistics on accuracy. Similarly, for area estimation, you would do the same. So I think the ground truth data again becomes really, really important to start getting at what you're talking about, to get measures of accuracy, to establish acceptable coefficients of variation. But they haven't been documented. Those are not yet international standards. And as I mentioned, FAO's Office of the Chief Statistician is going to start initiating that work. That work can't be just done internally within FAO, because most of the experts are outside our relatively small organization. So hopefully we can use this expert group meeting as a mechanism to leverage your expertise to participate in those discussions once there is the momentum to have consultations. I have taken note of your comment because I think it's absolutely spot on and really, really important. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Sangeeta, giving, I think,
you,
very
Ms.
direct.
Sangeeta.
I will move to the second presentation by Frank. So ground truth data collection approach for crop mapping, especially lesson learned during our latest field work. Frank is the senior researcher in Geoinformatics Center. I think he's been working with the agriculture related project with FAO last 5 years, and also he's having expertise on drone mapping and those geoinformatic techniques bringing into this discussion. Yeah, floor is yours, Frank.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Govinda, for that introduction. Yeah, so for this presentation, I'm going to sort of continue what Dan was talking about. So he was kind of setting up the technologies that we used in this project, which was to do crop type mapping. But we're also interested in the techniques used to collect ground truth data. So I'm going to focus on the lessons learned of what we learned from the field. Yeah, so here's a quick overview. So I'm gonna go quickly through some tools that we used, like for navigation or for data entry, and then some approaches one approach that we used, a windshield survey to collect the data, but also a couple of secondary sources of ground truth data that we wanted to try in this project that we hadn't tried before. So one was using drones to collect ground truth data, and the other was to use higher resolution satellite imagery. So in this project, as Dan mentioned, I believe we were initially working with Sentinel-2, but then we ended up using Landsat in the end. But so we're looking at higher resolution satellite imagery for that one. Okay, so very brief for navigation. We're already familiar with Google Maps for driving around. So we took this, just one choice of navigation, and applied this to navigating to our sort of like random points that we wanted to sample. And so here, basically, we took those points from QGIS and exported it as a KML file. And then we brought it into Google My Maps, which is in the Google universe. And so basically, you can create your own maps there. You can add KML files. So if you're point vectors or whatever, and load them in. And so once you have created that map, you can then load that into Google Maps and then navigate to any of these points in the field. And so we actually, it worked well because so familiar with Google Maps, right? But we did lose signal a couple of times, I guess, kind of getting out into the further reaches of the area. But we noticed that if we stayed within the app, we would still be able to continue navigation to the point we were headed to. But if we backed out of the app, then we just totally lost it until we got signal again. But one thing of note is that they provide the option to download an offline map. So if you know you're going to be going to an area with poor signal, you can download that ahead of time and still navigate like normal. So that's a pretty good feature. Also, I want to mention that Dan was talking about one of our study areas, Banpur Pisai, but I'll focus on another study area in Lopburi province called Chai Badan, but we were pretty much doing the same work. Okay, so another thing that we did was we tried a new to us data collection app called Open Forest Collect Mobile. And so here, I believe we went to about, I think we collected data for about more than 80 sites in situ with this. And so here, one of my colleagues was working this app, he was in charge of it. And so basically his review of it is very straightforward to create the survey. And there was a preview option for the survey in case you made some mistakes, you can go back and correct those before actually deploying it in the field, and a very simple interface. But there were some caveats. There was, in order to create the survey, you do it in one application called Open Forest Collect, which is you would use on your desktop or a notebook computer, and then you would then export and then load that into your phone and then open it through the app on the phone. But he said it was a little clunky. So maybe if there was like some kind of sync straight from the computer to the phone, that might have been a little easier. Also, the photo, this application is capable of storing photos from the field. So a lot of times I'm from the geospatial side. I'm not a statistician, so we like to take photos in the field of different directions when we're at our data collection point. So there, we want to store that data here too, and Collect Mobile was capable of doing that, but we had to make multiple attributes, basically one attribute per photo. It seemed like we would be able to load more multiple photos into one attribute, but we couldn't get that to work. Also, like Dan said, we recorded manual data in the field, so kind of pen and paper, just in case something went wrong with the app, even though we were working offline. But yeah, so we had that as backup. Okay, so we also did a windshield survey, and as Dan mentioned, we were using QField for this part of the work. So one of my colleagues was trying one data collection application, I was trying another. And so here, as the name implies, we were sitting in the vehicle collecting data from behind the windshield. So we're driving around, and basically in between in situ points, when we're driving to those, I was collecting sort of like roadside fields on the way. And yeah, so we were able to do that in QField. It has a couple of nice features that I value. One is that you can load a satellite base map into QField, and so you can, depending on how up to date the base map is, you can see the fields relatively well, according to your surroundings, right? So as we're passing by, say a cornfield, I would record that in the location. And also one thing that was nice that I haven't seen in Collect Mobile was that we can untether the location from our smart device to place it in the field as we're passing by. So we could put that point there. Anyway, so with this approach, we collected just over 100 points, and just collecting crops. So I believe we were collecting rice, maize, sugarcane, and cassava. And so you'll notice in this map here that our points are following roadways, right? So we were just kind of collecting these as we were driving. One way to improve this maybe is to set up your in situ data route ahead of time, and then set up your points, that your windshield points that you want to collect ahead of time. Whereas we were just kind of collecting them as we went, kind of willy-nilly. Okay, so moving on to our secondary sources of ground truth data. So we had one approach, our original approach with a drone. We were using a Phantom 4, a multi-rotor drone. And so what we wanted to do here was, when we navigated to one in situ site, we wanted to be able to collect multiple ground truth data, right? So here we have this autonomous mission set up, sort of like a grid. So if we were at the center point, we sent the drone to fly in this 2 square kilometer area, and it would take a photo at each of these points. And so the idea there is, it looks like it took about 14 minutes for this flight, but while we're collecting this data here in situ, the drone is flying and collecting at these points. And so idea was to increase our load of data that we bring in. However, I made a pretty grave oversight on our second flight for this type of approach, right? So this is an autonomous mission flying from waypoint to waypoint. First mission went fine. Second mission, I was setting this mission up, this flight path in the field on a small tablet, and I overlooked what I thought was a village ended up being a pretty big hill. And so what ended up happening was, when the drone went to that point, it lost connection, and then it kind of remained in the air until the battery ran down, and then it just landed in this forest area here. So then near the end of the day, we spent a few hours walking around this forest, trying to find our drone. There was about 3 or 4 of us, actually, myself, and then we corralled some workers from the sub-district to come help us look for it, and we didn't find it. But anyway, that's a lesson learned right there, is if I had to do it over again, I would prepare these autonomous missions back in the office. You know, granted, that's the ideal way of doing things, but sometimes, as you know, field work just doesn't work out like that, and you got to do it in the field. Yeah, so pay attention to the terrain. So then we revised our drone plan. So we had 2 drones with us, one as backup in case something happens to the first one. And so we had a smaller drone, but just as capable, a DJI Mavic 2 Pro, another small multi-rotor. And so, like Dan mentioned before, we wanted to extend our reach to areas with difficult access. So like, for example, at this point, I think we pulled up on this road, and there was a lot of trees here. And then we continued down the road a bit and found this motorcycle path, which wasn't great for our van. And then even on foot, we couldn't really approach it over here. So we just sent a drone up and got the point. Yeah, and so this is, I feel, really important for our season here. Our primary cropping season is very wet, as you'll see. And so it really does a number on the roads. A lot of these roads in these agricultural areas are just dirt roads for the most part. And so usually the vehicles you have going down these are small motorcycles that you see all over Southeast Asia, or farm vehicles. And so in a 15-seat passenger van, it did great. We had this van, it's one of our university vans. It's great for hauling our gear, but to go on these treks, not the best choice, especially when the roads get pretty narrow, as they do. But as you can see here, our van is stopped along this canal. The road, we just couldn't go any further. The van couldn't go. And so we sent the drone up and started collecting data. You can see some cassava over here. Yeah, so here's just a couple of just the sort of roads that we run into during the season. And altogether, I believe during about 4 days of work, we collected about just over 90 points of ground truth data. And 10 of those were with only with the drone. So we couldn't access at all. So we got there with the drone. And then one of those points was inaccessible due to canal, whereas most of the other ones were due to roads. And there were a couple of points that were behind gated private property. And so one we couldn't enter. I think one was a cement factory and another was a campground. We didn't want to go in, we didn't want to bother. And then we didn't want to send the drone in. So instead we took a point that was just nearby and accessible. So some drone matters worth noting. I'll try to quickly go through these. So when we're flying the drone holding our controller, we also have a smart device attached to it as well. So it might be a tablet or a smartphone. And so some of our controls are on the smartphone and so we also see a live feed from the drone as well while it's flying. So occasionally we would have like a disconnection with the smart device, and then we would not be able to see our sort of like the drone's eye view. We weren't able to record images either. So in that case, we'd either have to land the drone manually or perform a return to home function where the drone just comes back on its own. But anyway, every time that happened, we had to launch and then land and relaunch. So for the batteries, our original drone, we had 6 batteries, pretty comfortable to use most of the day. But when we went to this backup drone, we only had 3. And so we ended up bringing a power inverter along with us. And so we could charge the batteries on the go in the van by plugging it into the, I believe it's a 12-volt outlet within the vehicle. It worked great for us. We had no issues. But if you're traveling around the district or province on a motorcycle, that charging capability probably isn't there. So for this, when we were collecting the drone data, I was also using Qfield. And I mentioned this before in the other slide, but one good thing here was that we could untether the position from the phone and record as basically we put the point wherever the drone approximately was, and we would sort of match that up with a base map. And so we would find where the drone was based on the sort of the drone's eye view camera and our base map. And we've recorded our drone points like that. Also, we had permission to fly from the Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand. So we're doing this legally, which everyone should. And we also notified whichever areas we were flying to, district, whatever, that we were going to be flying there for the week. And also, once we lost our drone, we filed a police report. And that's mostly for our own internal inventory purposes, because when the university sees our drone isn't here this year for inventory, we have to explain it somehow. And also, if you're interested in drone laws and whatnot in your country, you can check out droneregulations.info for that. Okay, so we were thinking of a second part to this. So not just accessing difficult areas, but also remember, we're interested in a very high resolution satellite imagery as a secondary source of ground truth data. And we had this idea that maybe that wouldn't be the full, even though it's some of the highest resolution satellite imagery, maybe we still wouldn't be able to fully grasp which crop is growing in a given field, right? So in that case, we started, for every in situ point we visited, we flew the drone and recorded images for different flying heights, because at increasing heights, you're going to see the field a bit differently, right? So here we're seeing this big rectangle here in the top right, but once we get a little bit closer, down to 10 meters, so we're seeing just these individual rice plants. And sort of the same thing goes for cassava, sugarcane. So things look a bit different depending on how high you are. And so we went as low as 5 meters. I don't have that listed here, but we also had images at 5 meters. So around the 5 meter, 10 meter image flying height, you're able to identify the crops really well. And then the 90 meter, this height. So this is the highest we're legally allowed to fly in Thailand. But it would have been better if we could have flown higher, because I think it would have matched up with satellite imagery a little bit better, as you'll see. Okay, and so, yeah, so out of all of our in situ points that we visited, there were 6 that we did not capture these images at because it was raining. So we just collected with the mobile app and then moved on. Okay, so next, moving away from the drone and talking about the higher resolution satellite imagery. So we were looking at a few options. One, we wanted to start a little coarser for high resolution. So we came across Planet is a big provider of satellite imagery. They have these microsatellites that I think they capture the entire world every day, and you can just go and find their data. online. So that's typically going to be around 3 to 5 meter resolution. And so we actually got hooked up through Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative. They have these monthly base maps available, and I think you might be able to sign up and get them through Open Forest Siebel. And so we acquired this for our study areas, and I'm just kind of zooming in here in this yellow box, and you see it here as well. A little bit more zoomed in, and then even further zoomed in to some fields. This wasn't really going to do it for us if we're trying to do crop type identification for like secondary ground truth data. So anyway, we tried this one. It didn't work out. So then we were moving to higher resolution data. So this is a figure here of optical satellite imagery. This is basically here, we're looking at all of the Sentinel-2 images for the study area Chaibadan since Sentinel-2 started, so since 2017 to present day. So we took the averages for every month for this area. And so here we're seeing the months on the x-axis and the cloud percentage, like the percentage of clouds that are going to appear in satellite imagery on the y-axis. And so as we can kind of expect, usually in the dry season, like around January, February, March, April, usually there's pretty low cloud cover here. And then once we get into May, get into that rainy season, we're seeing this big jump. We have a lot of clouds. So optical imagery, it's kind of difficult to acquire that because of so many clouds, right? So we're considering that when we're going to higher resolution satellite imagery, just using the Sentinel images as an example. So here, there's a limited availability of historic imagery or just images in stock, basically, at the satellite image company. So they have some images available, but it's not exactly your dates, most likely. So you have to task the satellite to go and capture the imagery of where you want. But the problem is it's pretty risky during the rainy season, right? Because we're talking about being out there in June and July when we're almost at peak cloud here, right? So we ended up going with some older imagery, but kind of catching it at the end of the rainy season for, I believe it was the year before. So we went with that. And so we're using imagery from GeoEye-1 satellite. So this is about 100 square kilometers of 40 centimeter spatial resolution pan-sharpened images. Yeah, so we went with that. And so basically, you might say, well, why not, if you're going for this off date, why not just use Google Earth and Bing or Bing Maps? They have high resolution, you know, in the tens of centimeters as well. But with that, usually they give you a hint of where the dates are. They might say like from as old as this to now, but you don't know the exact date. And granted, the data that we have here, it's not the exact date that we were using, but at least we knew the date. So we just kind of went with this. And once again, we're trying to relate the drone images to satellite imagery. And so what does it look like? So here we're looking at the 90-meter drone images for a couple of in situ sites that we visited for sugarcane. And then here's one for maize. And then we're looking at a very high resolution satellite image of the same areas. And I'm not exactly seeing it. And granted, these aren't the same dates. So I know that goes into we have to take that into account, but you know, I'm not looking at this and then coming over here and looking at the satellite image and saying, oh, that's sugarcane, or based on our other images, that's cassava or rice or whatever it might be. I can see some rows here, but you know, these crops are usually grown in rows, both sugarcane, maize, as well as cassava. So I couldn't really make one way out of it or of another. But here we're seeing this point is actually under the cloud, or I'm sorry, in the shadow of a cloud. Thanks, Govinda. I'm wrapping it up. So then what we ended up doing was we put a Gaussian blur on these images to maybe kind of take it back a bit. And yeah, that still really wasn't doing it for me. I couldn't make one way or another out of it. that's kind of where it is. So I would say even with some of the higher resolution satellite images out there, we weren't making it happen. We weren't identifying crops. But it would be great for land use, land cover mapping. So here, this is from the same image, and I'm seeing a village right here, but we'd be able to identify built-up areas, crops, not crop types, but crops, or if we're talking land use, maybe we'd say agriculture, trees. We can see these trees, we can see this water, we can see these streams here in this pond. So we could use it for that, and people are already using it for that, right? We're talking about open forests. Open forests collect earth. The FAO has already promoted that for some time now and already used it in surveys. So yeah, that's around. Also, maybe this would work if we had if we had imagery near the same date. That might help us out. And maybe this is worth trying in the secondary cropping season when there's less clouds. Also, as far as the drone goes, it's pretty valuable to get to the difficult to reach areas, especially with the physical barriers that were around, like the roads and whatnot. But we should respect homes and businesses and stay away from there, and also pay attention to the terrain and try to do your autonomous mission planning ahead of time in the office. For the windshield survey, we could quickly collect a lot of ground truth data, but maybe we should put those points. We should maybe navigate, find our route ahead of time, and then we could plan which actual windshield sites we want to grab instead of just grabbing them on the go like we did. Also, for the data collection apps, Open Forest Collect Mobile worked really well for us, but it was kind of difficult with the images. And QField also worked pretty good, but I think that one has images or issues with images too. And finally, for the navigation, Google Maps and My Maps work pretty good, especially considering the offline map option. Thanks, guys. That's the end of my talk, and I would love to hear a question or two from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, especially sharing your lesson learned part, all the aspects technically and other moving around the field as well. So any questions from any colleagues? Yes, Sangeet.
I actually had one observation and two questions for you, Frank.
Sure.
It sounds when you explain what's needed to go out and use drones, that you're still incurring the same, some of the same high costs, perhaps even more than a traditional survey, because you still have to have at least 2 people go out into the field, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the costs of collecting data in situ with human beings. If that's the case, then where do you see the real value added in using drones? Is it just for these hard to reach areas? Could they be effective in things like getting corner points for area estimation? So in your view, given the human costs, which aren't going to change when you're using drones, where's the real value added?
Thanks, Sangeeta. I would say, yeah, as far as in my experience, I would say the value is there in these hard to reach areas. And granted, that was maybe only about 10% or so the areas we visited where we actually needed the drone. And also keep in mind that there were times when we couldn't use it at all because it was raining. So that kind of, but depending on how much it's raining during that season, right? Yeah, so I would say, yeah, for me, the utility lies in the hard to reach areas. As far as other applications of it, like corner points of a agriculture plot, right? So I think for that, usually when we want to make measurements from drone images, we have to run an autonomous mission with these overlapping flight lines, and that takes time, and then processing as well in order to get an image that we can measure on. So maybe that I think that would be a lot slower than just walking around and doing it in person, unless there was like one smaller area that you wanted to measure a lot. Maybe if you're talking just, I'm thinking in Thai units now, but 10 rai, but anyway, maybe for something of about that size, I'm sorry, I can't think of it in hectares or square kilometers, but maybe it worked for something like that, but I think even then you might be better off with people making those measurements.
Jacinta asked a really, really good question on using citizen science. So can we think about how do we actually use farmers and citizens to do some of this ground truthing and to share that? And like I said, if it takes more time to think, maybe that's a discussion we should keep till Friday, but I think it's worth raising.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's a very very good point. And I'm glad Jacinta brought that up, that citizen science is really powerful. I know we use it for some of our projects here, for not necessarily agriculture related, but yeah, it's a great way to sort of boost the amount of data you have coming in, right? And so I guess the concern is controlling the data quality, make sure everybody's kind of doing it the same way, collecting the same quality of data. And yeah, so that's, I think it's worth discussing as we continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. So maybe further we can discuss on last day. So I think OA is waiting from even previous session to raise questions. So I think maybe I will give the chance that OA, so colleagues, so you can raise your question.
Yeah. Thank you for your sharing presentation. I think it's very interesting for using for the drone in the ground truth data. However, I have two questions. For the first one, when you describe about how to using the drone for the agricultural survey, you use just only for the inaccessible area, agricultural area. How do you think to planning about how to utilize the function of drone for the vegetation index or something? Maybe you get the healthy or the sample or something. Yeah, and for the second question is about that, because you said on the conclusion slide that you have the limitation on the near same day satellite imagery on the very high satellite image. So you get the solution about the use for the next cropping season that available. So I think that's how you validate when use the two different season to compare together. Could you explain in detail about the how to use for the next VHR to the for the comparison?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'll try to answer these briefly, and thank you for your questions. So as far as if you want a signature from a given area for the crop, say, we would use a different sensor. So for this time, we were just using a RGB camera for basically qualitative purposes to identify the crops visually and then compare it to the high resolution satellite imagery. But if you were looking for additional ground truth parameters like the crop signature, then yeah, you go with another type of sensor for that. And just based on what you're working, like maybe you want to make some kind of empirical relationship between that signature and what we're getting from the satellite, right? So that would be, yeah, that would be perfectly fine way to go. I think it's a nice idea, just depending on what you want in your ground truth data. And the other one, yeah, so comparing the different dates, it wasn't ideal, but it was what we had to work with basically. So as you can see, it didn't work out so well for us in that regard. But as I mentioned in the conclusions, I think it'd be worth trying during the dry season, like maybe around January to March or April, and see with an image that's available in cloud-free, compare that with drone ground truth data. I think that might be a better way to go. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Pansul Hasarika to discuss about the crop monitoring and yield forecasting using satellite data. Over to Dr. Mansul, if you can precisely go with the 20 minutes, it would be very appreciated.
So I'm going to talk about crop monitoring and yield estimation using satellite data. Of course, I mean, this is a very common now, and also some of the ground truth data we use, and those I'll be a little bit highlighting. Just a moment. Yeah, before I go to just so in AIT, we are doing several, our center is doing several things. remote sensing GIS application, disaster management, agriculture, environment capacity. So in agriculture, we are doing crop mapping and monitoring, agroecological zoning, and crop security mapping, development of agriculture related with best platform kind of downstream. And this many of these projects are with FAO regional office and country office. So for crop monitoring and yield forecasting, so this is one work we did in India, which has some World Bank support, a World Bank project. So basically, this is one of the largest, most populated state called Uttar Pradesh in India. And you can see we use MODIS satellite data, which is medium resolution, say 250 meter. But it is, as you know, it is having the data 2 times every day. So basically, if you have this kind of very high temporal every day or 2 days, 2 times in a day, then there is a possibility to get cloud-free images for a, say, in 1 week to 10 days time. So that is the advantage. And particularly this is rice cultivation in that state, and it's a large area rice cultivation. You can see they almost they only grow 2 crops, mainly rice and wheat. So in the winter, towards the winter, they wheat, and during this June, July, they plant rice. So with MODIS data, and this, as you know, this is a rice are grown in rain-fed conditions. So there are a lot of rain and clouds. So it is very difficult to get cloud-free data. If you use some high resolution data, we use MODIS to get cloud-free data. Although it's medium scale resolution, still is good to capture the crop status, rice crop status in the whole state. So you can see these are the NDVI. So dark blue is a high NDVI, 0.9 to 0.95, and then you can see the in this scale as this color fades, the NDVI goes down. So now this, once we have this one, and we have this data from 2000 continuously, because this MODIS data is available around 2000. So we have the every district, these are the districts. So in district level, we have the yield from 2000, and also we have the satellite data. So this is NDVI. Then we develop a relationship. So year and the NDVI, this actual crop rice production and the NDVI, and we develop a regression equation. Then we can, once we develop the regression equation, then the moment you know this NDVI just before ripening of the crop, you can know the yield. So before harvesting, you can know the yield. Because, for example, once you have the regression equation, then you just put the NDVI value here, then you get the forecasted yield. So here we can see actual, and this is predicted. And this year, 2002 and 2003, to the drought year, so it is actually 68,000 metric ton, and here it's 71,000 metric, which is predicted. So the good thing is that this is done before harvesting, but this actual data, it comes from crop cutting experiments, and which will take 6 to 8 months. So but if you use remote sensing, you may not be the very 100% accurate information, but this will give an idea that how much production your state or your country will have, and that at the time of harvesting, this market price is less, so you can take a decision. If you think that your production is going to be less, maybe you need to procure. So at that point of time, during harvesting time, you can buy the rice from international market. It will be cheaper. So that's this kind of management, this procurement or commodity trading, this is useful. And some of the, I understand some of the private companies using this kind of techniques for procuring the commodities. So this is we did. Then we also look at this because we are taking this data and every 10 days. So we know that these are, you see the yellow one, they started crop planting rice in May, because this upper portion of this state is a highly irrigated area. So their water, they diverted from Ganges River and they irrigate. So they can plant early. Then the blue one is June and the red one is July. So you can also see how many crops. As I said, there are two major crops. Double crop means this red area is single crop, and this green area is double, wheat, rice and wheat. And there are some triple crop are very non-significant area. So basically either rice or rice and wheat, these are the two. So we can, using remote sensing data, we can definitely get this kind of information. So also we did same thing in Bangladesh, and there are two rice crop. One is the normal season, they call Aman, from June, July to around September, October. That is one season, the normal season. And another they call Boru season. That is around, I think, somewhere February, March, April, May, that time. So we did a lot good ground truth data in this almond season area, and you see this our result. This is the blue one is ground truth and the red one is remote sensing derived, the way I have just mentioned in India, same way. So once we have the ground truth data, this predicted and the from the remote sensing and this actually it's become very good, very close. But if you don't have ground truth data, it is not really good. So I think ground truth has a very important role to play in this kind of analysis. So another one is we have some this Send to Agri platform, which is being promoted by European Space Agency. So they use Sentinel-2 data, but their latest version, they are also now bringing Sentinel-1 data. So Sentinel-2 data is optical, Sentinel-1 is microwave or SAR data. So they are trying to combine this one, but this platform is again, it's a evolving platform. There are some improvement are going on. So it is still, I would say, not very stable yet, but maybe in the coming months or so, it will be more stable to do this kind of analysis. So basically, you have cloud-free data. Then you extract the NDVI, leaf area index kind of thing. Then also you do the dynamic crop mask, because you are getting satellite data, say 10-meter Sentinel-2 data every week or so, and then you can get the crop extent map and yield. So this is the overview of the this system. This is kind of a sophisticated system. Once you establish the system, it will automatically download the data from the ESA website, and then it will automatically do the atmospheric corrections. Then it will also prepare some surface reflectance composite. Then from there, it will estimate the vegetation status, and also it will do the crop mask, and also then crop type and area map. But one very important input is the ground truth data. You see, everything is automatic, but one thing which it cannot do is ground truthing. We have tried this system, this platform, but without ground truth, it do something, but the result is very, very poor. So ground truth is very, very important if you want to use this platform. So some of this work we have done in Thailand. And so you see that these are the settlement areas. So this system captured well, and some of the other agricultural area also the system captured. And then this is again we have classified using this system 3 crops: rice, cassava, and sugarcane in Thailand. So this is then also I think some of we also work with FAO together to collect some ground truth data in the rice field near north part of AIT. And this yellow one, you can see these rice areas from Central Agri platform. And this is the, you can see the whole, this in Pathum Thani province, you can see that this all green area is mostly rice cultivated area. And this kind of work, I mean, it has been used by some of the countries. But the issue, as I said, it is you need good ground truth data, number one. Number two, it is a very resource intensive platform. You need very high processing capability, as well as you need very large amount of data storage. So that is one limitations. But if you have this system established platform in your department, then you don't have to do much, everything data downloading, data processing, and will be done automatically, and you will get the final product. So you can set every 15 days or every month, so that once you set that time frame, it will automatically give you. So in that sense, it's easy, but as I said, it has also a lot of data intensive, a lot of computation resources are required. So this is again same in north of AIT. So accuracy assessment, overall accuracy, we find 82%, and one of our former Sasa from Indonesia, she was also in AIT, she mentioned that it is accuracy required 90%. So that again, we have to see, but I think that is very tough unless you have a lot of ground truth data and a lot of good quality images, and your algorithm is also matured. Probably it may be possible in future, but mostly around 80% is commonly achieved by this kind of platform. And also there are some global level course scale voluntary ground truth data. This is not for basically agriculture, but in general, there is one project called Confluence Degree Confluence project. You can see here, and every latitude longitude crossing, your people are encouraged to take a photograph and or few photographs and upload to the system, this platform. And you can see all the countries in the left side, including Thailand. It is there. So if you go to Thailand, I went to the Thailand and Nakhon Sawan, where some of our data has been already collected. So you can see this location. One person in 2013, he took this conference 15 degree and 100 degree latitude longitude crossing, and this is a rice field you can see here. So this kind of information is available globally. This is all the countries, but this voluntary. It depends on if some. For example, this person, he visited many countries for this, and he voluntarily take this point, and you see here in the GPS 16 degree and 100 degrees. So this, when you upload this GPS reading need to be uploaded for confirmation. So this kind of, they will tell you steps what are the things required and how to upload this data. And this is visit made into February 2013, and this person is Rainer Mouch, and this is original accuracy is 3 meters, topography is flat, vegetation is flat. This is important. So I think this kind of, if you go to this website, you can see Thailand, there's many points in the central part of Thailand. And you can see, but some of the other points is still blank. Some of you, my colleagues from Thailand might like to look at it. And see if this can be populated. This will be useful. As I said, this is not for agriculture, but this is a kind of given an idea of how, because this is a very coarse scale, every latitude longitude crossing, but it still gives some idea about their land use, and this is freely available, this data. So conclusions, with the increasing availability of free remote sensing data, crop monitoring, yield forecasting can be becoming easier than before. And there are also a lot of commercial satellites are coming up nowadays. And many countries, they have their own satellites. So this is becoming much easier than before. If crop cover a large area, as I have mentioned in one province in India, that kind of large scale cropping of say rice or wheat, its area estimation and yield forecasting can be done with a medium regional satellite data like MODIS with a good level of accuracy. High resolution data are useful for monitoring multiple crops if several crops are grown in that particular area, and ground truth data is essential for good level of accuracy. And as we have also seen in case of Sentinel, Centro Agri platform, it can detect multiple crop cultivation and also small patches. So in that case, the ground data is very, very essential. Without that, you cannot get a good accuracy. Thank you very much. That's from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Mansoor. I would like to give the floor to Sangeeta to bring her discussions with the presentation, and then we can focus the question and answers for both the sessions at the end. So she's going to discuss about the maintaining privacy and publishing anonymized geospatial data. I think this is a very important topic. I think we've been talking about the collecting data, dissemination data, and I think she's going to bring the discussion how we can save the privacy and then how we can anonymize when we publish in the geospatial data. Over to Sangeeta, and she also facilitating this session, so I will leave the discussion. I think and also at the end you can moderate. You have roughly 25 minutes for everything. Okay.
Thank you, Govinda. I may go relatively quickly through this presentation, but I want to focus on some of the issues we have to consider in terms of both dissemination as well as the collection of ground truth data. So the context, of course, for ground truth data is driven by remote sensed images and how they can be used for producing agriculture statistics. The driver behind using this particular source of big data is because traditional surveys cost more. So even if we're using traditional survey approaches to do ground truthing, the sample size will always be smaller than if we're using the survey itself to collect the agricultural statistics. We already know what some of the key uses of Earth observation or remote sense data is, and we know what the necessities of ground truth data are. When we start talking about collecting ground truth data in situ, we're often using the traditional statistical techniques. And so this was something very interesting for me to observe when Frank was using the various mechanisms for ground truthing. That in fact, when he went into the field and was doing in-person observation, he was using traditional area frames to do his sampling. And he was using traditional methods to either record the results on paper or to record the results in an app, right? But we do know, as I said before, that ground truth data is high in cost. So I think we do have to talk also about how do we make sure as a community of practitioners, we find mechanisms to share this data. And we share it in a way that's open. So I do want to spend a few minutes just going through what the concept of open is. When we talk about ground truth data, for it to be useful, not just for ourselves, but for other people, what are the variables they need? If we are disseminating, are there any privacy, confidentiality, or ownership considerations that we have to take into account? And this pertains even for those of us who work for academic institutions or private sector organizations, because often privacy legislation is not just for other government agencies. And finally, how does techniques like data anonymization address these privacy and confidentiality concerns? So I want to start with going through open data principles. And I think this is valuable, irrespective of today's topic, because I've found moving to even an organization like FAO, often official statisticians confuse open and free. And it's really important to know that they're not the same thing. So we know that food and agriculture statistics in some countries sits in binders, right? It sits in documents still, and particularly historical. Sometimes it resides on someone's laptop or a server, but that person goes away, the data goes with them. And that's often true of ground truth data because it's not seen as a public good. It's not seen as an output in its own right. Sometimes it's stored in boxes and files, and sometimes it's just not accessible. So the issues in terms of making ground truth data accessible to second and third party users may be driven by the same principles as dissemination of official statistics. You want to make sure that the data is findable, so it's publicly available and it's easy to find. One of the things that often makes data hard to find is our own personal innovations. And I speak from experience. If there's a particular term that's already accepted use, then being innovated and creating a new term means that the global users who don't know that new term are not going to search for it. So it's, you know, creativity shouldn't be in creating new terminology. It should be in using the terminology that's established. Data needs to be accessible and easily downloadable, and also open in terms of machine readable, because often we're dealing with huge volumes of data. If it's not machine readable, if we have to transcribe the data, it might as well be in a book. Coherent with privacy laws. Interoperable. This is where I think official statisticians have a huge advantage, because often in the broader community of data practitioners, particularly IT users and new data scientists, when they think of interoperable as how do you integrate data across different sites? Official statisticians use official classifications. So we tend to use M49 classifications for countries within a country. A national statistics office will set a classification schema, hierarchical classification for country, province, municipality, city. And because that's used across data sets, at least at a location level, you can integrate multiple data sets. And then of course, reusability becomes important. So this is where being free is not the same thing as being open. And we experienced this with FAO, that I would get when I worked on FAOStat a number of queries about, can we use your data? Can we republish it? And I would have to chase after people, and I would still not get a clear answer because the answer that the data is free is not the same thing as saying a third-party user can use your data, add to it, add value, add it, and reuse it in another format. So reusability is often really important. So what is open data? It has three different components. One is it's technically open. That means its formats are machine readable. It's legally open, so that there's actually a license by which an individual knows that they can not only get the data and use it, but whether or not they can republish it and under what conditions, and then terms of use. So I want to go quickly through these because these are going to be important when we think about dissemination mechanisms and platforms. We know what the benefits are, and I do want to still spend a little bit of time on this because it does influence your choice of license. So we know that open data supports innovation. At the end of the day, we want the young person to go and develop an app and use various sources of data and produce a new product. If we want that innovation, they have to have the ability to resell their product. If they're restricted to not using the data for commercial reasons, innovation is restricted. So we need to carefully think, if we're going to move on ground truth data, do we want people to develop their own apps and to sell their own products? If so, keep that in mind when you select the license. It does leverage public sector information to develop consumer and commercial products. It supports research. It supports informed decisions for consumers as well. So one of the differences when you start moving into open data is when apps are developed that help individuals make decisions. And think of the common things. I use my apps every day in 3 different ways. I use apps to book flights. I use apps to book hotels. I use apps to search for directions. I use apps to book taxis, right? And When I'm booking a taxi, I want to search on where my destination is, to determine whether or not it actually makes sense to get a taxi or use public transportation or something else, right? So open data does make a difference. And at least for consumers, Google Maps is open to some extent. It's definitely free, but whether it's technically open is a whole different question. Or sorry, legally open is a whole different question. And then you also have proactive disclosure. Many of you who work in official statistics office, you know that you get queries. So I used to get queries, can I use this data set in my new product? Well, if there had been a license at the time in clear terms of use, I wouldn't have had to deal with those questions because the user would have been informed, and that reduces effort on the part of official statisticians or any data producer in government. It also, we know, open data was initially driven by the open government initiatives that improve accountability. So what does it mean to be technically open? The graph I like best is actually the 5-star graph of open data that goes through degrees of openness. So the type of format, electronic format, that's the least open is a PDF. Because if you have a PDF document, you still have to transcribe the data into a format that's more easy to use. And I find it not an effective use of my time, because if I have to do the transcription, other users have to do the transcription. It means that we're duplicating an effort across individuals, potentially across organizations and across countries for no good reason. The next level is Excel files. And to some extent, Excel is now almost like CSV just because of the proliferation of the tools available to translate Excel. But Excel is still a Microsoft product. CSV is not. So CSV is a level higher. And then you get into the RDF and the linked open data. Often the RDF format requires intensive support from IT people. So in the world of statistics, it's not usually the format that's used. We can bypass that and through the use of classifications have CSV files, CSV data files that are linkable. Thing to know about this 5-star system, again, the principles. The first star is make your stuff available on the web. The second is to make it available as structured data. The third is to make it available as structured data in a non-proprietary format. And I mentioned that Excel is a proprietary format under the Microsoft suite, where CSV is not. And then the RDF gets into using URIs to denote things. Like I said, this gets really, really technical. I'm not sure that this is the best approach for statistical data, but certainly you want to be able to link your data to other data. So now let's move to what is meant by legally open. So there are already licenses that designate the different types of open data. An individual, an organization does not need to create a new license. And this has been generated by an organization that's promoting the Creative Commons. The Creative Commons are, in fact, a sense of openness. So if we think of the commons in agriculture, it's having common grazing land. Anybody can use it, nobody's excluded. The Creative Commons is the same thing. They fund themselves primarily through donations, sometimes through big donors, but often through small donations by citizens like you and I. So what are the types of license? They typically have 4 different characteristics, and they're combined. So the CC means Creative Commons. And as soon as you apply one of these licenses, it is usually in most countries already a legal license. And you can see at the bottom row what those licenses look like, what the figure looks like. So right now, FAO has an open license policy when it comes to our statistical data. And if you go to FAOStat, you'll see one of these licenses applied. So the 4 conditions are that credit must be given to the creator. If you have none of these conditions, including that no credit needs to be given, that creates a possibility that a user of your data can go and slap a license on it and claim ownership. So usually we would not recommend that you not have a buy. At a minimum, the original data source should be cited. And that's all the buy says. The buy doesn't restrict use. It just says, if you're going to use our data, please cite that it's our data. And the reason for that is if you do have a commercial use permitted, if the commercial producer that uses your data goes and creates this value-added product, you still want their users who may only be interested in the underlying data to come back to your source to get it. And that's why the by becomes important for those two reasons. The NC means non-commercial uses only. Our FAO statistics is under a non-commercial license. Because it's aggregated statistics, okay, most of the statistics you can get elsewhere. But I would strongly encourage, particularly in our domain, to consider removing this non-commercial restriction in order to generate innovation, but also in order to get the involvement of the private sector in sharing their ground truth data. Essay means that adaptations must be shared under the same terms. This I strongly recommend. If we make our data free, then anyone who's doing minimal transformation of that data, maybe we want to make sure that they make it free as well, right? Maybe not. Again, it depends on the terms of use and exactly how you apply the essay, what adaptations mean. And then ND is no derivatives or adaptations of the work are permitted. This is one I'd usually not recommend. You want people to be able to improve on your data, reuse it. So I would say the by is one condition you absolutely want. The ND is one condition you don't want. So you should be really looking at the first 3 rows in terms of the licenses. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it gives you the names in terms of which conditions are applied. So CC BY means it's only attributing the original data source, whereas CC BY NC means it's attributing the original data source and no commercial uses are permitted. So you'll all get a copy of this presentation if you want to look at the individual components. So how do you go about choosing a license? You can actually go to the Creative Commons website and look at their license chooser. I provide the link here. You need to be aware of a few things. You can't revoke a license. So if you start off with a license that doesn't restrict commercial use and you decide 3 years down the road that you're going to change the license, anyone who's already accessed your data before the new license is in place is still subject to the license that was in place when they got the data. So you can't retroactively change their terms of use. You must own or control copyright of the work or the data set before you can put a license on it. So if it's not data that you have, that you've created or you've been given the right to claim ownership, you can't put a license on it. And then conditions then before you apply a Creative Commons license. Is the material copyrightable? If it's in the public domain, it's not. And different countries have different considerations for what that means. Do you own the material? Or are you authorized to license it? Are you aware that these licenses are not revocable? And do you have a terms of use? So in terms of use, this outlines the responsibilities of the producers and users. So when we go to organizations like the OECD or FAO, where we're getting data from different sources, some of the data that we obtain is actually proprietary and can't be shared under a Creative Commons license. So you can still establish a license for your organization and note where the exceptions are. And those exceptions pertain to the data that you don't own. For any statistical database, the terms of use will include general information, a recommended citation. So if you have a BY license, what does a user actually put in, right? And we see this now even in journals, that if we're using an article from a journal, they will indicate how to cite the journal. The use of the material, the links to the website, use of logos, more importantly, restrictions on use of logos. So FAO, for instance, has very strict conditions on use of logos because there will be nonprofit and private sector entities that want to use the FAO logo to appear as if we're endorsing their product, right? So you do want to have that condition. Limitations on liability. So misuse of data, you don't want to be responsible for. Again, there's examples that you can look at. They shouldn't be complicated, but any open data license, whether you use one or not, a terms of use is really important. And because we're talking about dissemination of ground truth data, I think it's important for us to take these considerations. I also want to mention the platforms for dissemination. One example here is a microdata catalog that FAO operates. Often this is just hyperlinks to microdata that's published by another organization. And when it's hyperlinks and we don't actually have the data residing, then we don't put any license on its use. The license that applies is the license of the data owner. In a few rare cases, we can actually publish microdata, our own microdata here, in which case it would be subject to the FAO terms of use and licenses that are put in place. So this gives a bit of background in terms of when we look at dissemination. If you're looking at creating your own platform, this is what you want to think about. If you're looking at making your ground truth data accessible in a format on your website, you want to think about the formats and the licenses that would be behind it. What other considerations are there in publishing ground truth data? These relate to privacy and confidentiality, and particularly policies and legislations that are already in place. But I also want to talk briefly about data anonymization, because this is one acceptable mechanism to maintain microdata and respect privacy and confidentiality policies. So when we talk about data anonymization, if we start off with data protection or privacy legislation, all countries have it. I've given an example of Thailand's Data Protection Act. I won't go through the details, but the link is there. The EU brought in a few years ago a really, really big act to cover all EU countries, their data protection regulation. FAO now has a data protection policy. FAO's policy is restricted to data used for statistical purposes. Most national policies are not about official statistics. They're much, much bigger than that. So the Statistics Act and any privacy or confidentiality policy embedded in the Statistics Act adheres to these, but these are the bigger issues at stake. And they pertain not only to government authorities, they also pertain to private sector organizations. So, you know, you're using an app now, you download Grab in Thailand, Uber in the US, you download booking.com anywhere in the world. Usually there is some kind of consent that you have to give in terms of use of your own data. That consent is a requirement of national and pan-national data protection legislation. We need to keep that in mind when we're talking about ground truth data, because if we are collecting any variables that may be subject to these acts, we have to think carefully about how we treat them. One thing that's also really important to note that's often forgotten by data producers is that this legislation or policies applies throughout the data cycle. So it's not just in terms of how you share data, it's also how you exchange it, how you use it, and very importantly, how you store and archive it. Often these legislations will restrict the length of time that you can actually keep data sets stored. For example, now FAO is articulating that more clearly. So data that the statistics units may have had that's 10, 20 years old, we may be required to delete under our policies. And the same thing may apply to all of you when you're looking at collecting ground truth data, if you're subject to a national legislation or policy. I do want to note that anonymized microdata are typically exempt because they've already addressed privacy and confidentiality concerns. In FAO's data protection policy, it's explicit. It says this policy does not pertain to anonymized microdata. So it's worth talking about. What does anonymized microdata mean? It's basically data that has been screened and passes the rules to avoid statistical disclosure. So it implements statistical disclosure control. It prevents the disclosing of private information, which are things like name, address, but also confidential information, which may be characteristics of a person, characteristics of a household, or characteristics of an enterprise. And there's many techniques. We won't go through all the techniques here. The very simple one is data masking. You drop variables. So you don't keep name, first, last name, or address in the final data set that you disseminate. You replace identifiers. So if you've got a name, you could replace it with a number, particularly if the data producer for some reason still needs to be able to link back. You use generalization, you aggregate. So instead of publishing income, you might want to have an income range. Instead of publishing age, you might want to have an age range. Instead of publishing the amount of a commodity produced, you may have a production range. Data swapping. And then there's statistical approaches like perturbation or creation of synthetic variables. Again, I won't go into the details today, but there is a trade-off that the more that you transform your data, the more you're taking away some accuracy or quality of information. So there's a trade-off between the utility of your data set to the user and the protection of privacy of the respondents that are covered, whether they're individuals, households, or enterprises. Ideally, you'd like to lose as little information as possible and have complete confidentiality and privacy, but it's not always feasible. At the very best, you're dropping some variables. I won't go to this slide in a lot of detail because it gets into what we mean by anonymity. And often in the statistics world, we talk about K anonymity. And that means that there's only a group of K respondents that can be compared. Typically, this K, when we're doing surveys, it's set equal to 5. Sometimes it's as low as 3. So let me give you an example of an enterprise survey where you're surveying companies by location. If you set K equal to 2, and there are only 2 players or 2 people in that group, I'm one of the people, I automatically know what the other is. There's no confidentiality. Particularly for enterprise surveys, K equal to 2 is never, ever applied because companies are operating based on intelligence that they alone have. And as soon as they're privy to the detailed intelligence of their competitor, you no longer have that competitive edge. So K for enterprise surveys cannot be set less than 3, it is often set to 5. For individuals, it can be set to 3. Again, when you're talking about something like tax data for income statistics, the IRS, the United Internal Revenue Service that's responsible for implementing all of the taxation in the country, they produce an anonymized microdata set. It used to be every 2 to 3 years. They would use particular techniques for the group of top 5 income earners, so as to not make it obvious who those 5 people were. So there are techniques. There's also techniques that apply to spatial data. And spatial data considers location as a variable. So in this particular spatial data, you can see 3 sets of colors, yellow, orange, and green. How do you then create anonymity if you want K equal to 2? You often are using spatial methods. And again, I would never recommend setting K equal to 2. So this is just exposing you to the fact that there are well-established techniques for anonymizing data, including spatial data. And this slide repeats some of the same methods. It doesn't talk about the masking and pseudonymization, but random perturbation, adding a little bit of noise, transforming the data, aggregating the data, and then despatializing. In some cases, you may not need to anonymize data at all. If it's already not violating any privacy or confidentiality, it may not be necessary. There are methodologies behind and research papers behind this. Again, I won't go through this in detail. It's just to flag that while we're continuing our discussions this week, we want to think about any advice that we're giving in identifying core variables for a ground truth data set, disseminating ground truth data set. These are things that we need to keep in the back of our mind. We don't need to apply them ourselves, but we do need to make sure that it's clear that we understand that there's confidentiality issues and that they're addressed. So points for discussion this week. What standards could be adopted in official agriculture statistics to enable greater use of survey data as ground truth data? That's one question. Or ground truth data collected from surveys. One of the things that we will be doing is, as I mentioned earlier, sending you an online survey to fill. It's not complete. There are still gaps in the information we're requesting, but it's our starting point, and we want to get your insights. So one of the first things that often is discussed is what are core variable? What's the minimum data set? So for example, if we're using ground truth data only to validate a crop, what's the minimum data we need? Is it just the crop name, the date and time and the location down to GPS coordinate, or is there something else that's also needed? If we're using citizen-based ground truthing, maybe it's not sufficient to have those three variables. But if you have those three variables, then we can start asking, is there any privacy that's violated? If by GPS coordinate and date and time, we know what the crop was, do we have to change anything in that? And maybe the answer is no, right? Why I'm raising this is, one, you're answering this survey. It's important to really get a sense of those absolutely necessary variables. It doesn't mean that there aren't other important variables that you can't identify, but knowing what the absolute necessary minimum set is may help us establish that that minimum set doesn't require an anonymization. It can be shared relatively easily. Then, of course, later, we'll talk about the selection of appropriate open licenses and terms of use. Likely not during this set of meetings. So this is just to flag the issue. And then we do want to have some discussion this week on what are some of the available platforms. Do we need to start talking about creating yet another platform for the world, or can we use something that exists? Dr. Manzul just presented in his presentation his example of citizen collected data, including the photo. These were the variables that were reported, right? We had the data collector. That's private data. We had distance to an asphalt road. That may be important. You may think that's essential. You may think that's nice to have. We had time in addition to date. Position accuracy. We have to express what that means. The topography. That may be useful, particularly if later data collection is going to look at the potential for using drones or alternative sources to an in situ, in-person visit. And they called it vegetation, we called it crop type, right? This is, again, a lot of background to get you thinking about how do we start creating an environment where we can publish ground truth data and use ground truth data collected by other organizations. So you want to think both in terms of the considerations that you face in publishing, but also the considerations that you think are important in using a third party's ground truth data. So with that context, I'd like to pass the mic back to all of you for your questions.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, everyone. We can open for Q&A. I think Sangeeta, shared a very important aspect. I think you see the complete discussion of 3 days. I think we talk about the ground truth data collection mechanism, even the how we plan in the field work, and then we talk about the different platforms. And I think Sangeeta wrap up first day, I think, bringing the importance of data privacy and then other things that we should consider when we planning to establish this kind of data sharing and data collection mechanism in our organization. So I believe there could be questions. I think, yeah, can open for a Q&A session. So we also, I think, sharing the kind of web page. So we're accommodating all the presentation, Q&A, and then answers into that web page where you can even share later with your colleagues who are interested on this ground truth data. Yeah, thank you, everyone.